Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into the absolutely fascinating 70-year story of how India's map was sculpted. We're going to explore exactly how this incredibly diverse nation transitioned from a massive, fragmented post-independence puzzle into the dynamic, living borders we know today. So, how many times can a country actually redraw its own map? It's a pretty provocative question, isn't it? But, since 1947, India's internal borders have been continuously shifting. If you look at the geopolitical layout of India, it really acts less like a static drawing permanently etched in ink and a lot more like a block of clay. It's constantly being reshaped and remolded to reflect the changing administrative and cultural realities on the ground.
Section 1. The Constitutional Rulebook.
To truly understand how this map keeps changing so fluidly, we have to look at the underlying code, Articles 1 through 4 of the Constitution. Let's jump right into Article 1, which firmly establishes India as a union of states. Now, what does that actually mean in practice? Well, unlike the American Federation, which was essentially born out of an agreement among existing states, the Indian Federation is fundamentally different. The states have absolutely no right to secede. This makes India an indestructible union, but one that is entirely composed of destructible, changeable states. So the union itself is permanent, right? But those lines inside it, they're completely flexible. What's especially brilliant here is the sharp contrast between two very specific constitutional phrases. The Union of India strictly refers to just the states. But the territory of India, that is a much wider expression. It includes the states, the centrally administered union territories, and, crucially, any foreign territories that India might acquire down the road. The framers literally built in room for the country to grow. So how did these internal borders actually get changed? Article 3 lays out the precise steps for Parliament to redraw a state's boundaries. First, a bill is introduced, but only with the president's recommendation. The president then refers it to the concerned state legislature to get their views. But, and here is the absolute kicker, those views are completely non-binding. Parliament can just listen and then ignore them entirely if they choose to. The really crucial takeaway here is that Parliament can pass this massive change to a state's geography with just a simple majority. This perfectly highlights the supreme power of the Parliament in this specific arena. Thanks to Article 4, the government doesn't have to go through the grueling process of passing a massive constitutional amendment just to alter an internal boundary. They can literally get it done through the ordinary legislative process. Section 2. The Post-Independence Puzzle. Now that we know the rulebook, let's look at the sheer scale of the crisis right at the moment of independence in 1947. At that time, there were a staggering 552 princely states sitting squarely within India's geographical boundaries. I mean, just imagine trying to stitch together a unified nation out of direct British provinces and over 500 highly distinct sovereign principalities. It was an absolute mammoth task of integration. Initially, the Constitution tried to wrangle this chaos using a highly complex four-fold classification system, Part A, B, C, and D states. It was clunky. And that cumbersome 1950 setup was totally swept away and radically simplified by the States Reorganization Act of 1956. That gave us a much, much cleaner map of 14 states and 6 union territories. Section 3. The Linguistic Reorganization. But how exactly do we get from that messy four-part system to that 1956 reorganization? Ultimately, it boiled down to a fierce, undeniable grassroots demand to redraw the map based on mother tongues. Starting back in 1948, early committees flatly rejected language as a basis for drawing borders. They were terrified it would fracture the newly independent nation. But the public pressure was just immense. It all culminated in the tragic 56-day hunger strike and eventual death of Pothi Srimolu in 1952. This massive event essentially forced the government's hand, leading to the creation of the first linguistic state, Andhra, in 1953. And that opened the floodgates. It led straight to the Fazali Commission and that sweeping linguistic reorganization of 1956 we just talked about. And the momentum certainly didn't stop in 56. Popular agitations continued to fracture these large bilingual regions. By 1960, the massive state of Bombay was split into Marathi-speaking Maharashtra and Gujarati-speaking Gujarat. Fast forward a bit, and following intense protests, Punjab was reorganized in 1966, carving out the Hindi-speaking state of Haryana and the Union Territory of Chandigarh. Meanwhile, the nearby hilly region of Himachal Pradesh eventually earned full statehood by 1971. Section 4. The Northeast Jigsaw. While the West and North were being sculpted largely by language, a totally different, incredibly complex jigsaw puzzle was being pieced together in the Northeast. The Northeast required a highly unique approach. Through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the massive original state of Assam was continuously carved up. But this wasn't just about language. It was heavily focused on protecting unique tribal identities and cultural homogeneity. We see Nagaland emerge in 1963, followed by a major reorganization in 1972 that gave statehood to Manipur, Tripura, and Meghalaya. And finally, Mizoram and Arunachal Pradesh became full states in 1987, slowly completing this incredibly intricate regional border system.
Section 5. Coastal acquisitions and external borders.
Okay, so internal borders are shifting constantly. But at the exact same time, India was also actively acquiring colonial holdouts on its coasts and settling complex external boundaries. This period marked the true end of European colonialism on the subcontinent. The French peacefully handed over Puducherry in 1954. The Portuguese, on the other hand, had to be ousted by police action in 1961 to finally liberate Goa, Daman, and Diu. And then there's the fascinating story of Sikkim. It had been a protectorate, but in a unique geopolitical move, Sikkim held a referendum in 1975 and voluntarily chose to integrate, becoming the 22nd state of the Indian Union. Now, remember earlier when we discussed that altering an internal border only requires a simple majority in parliament? Well, in 1960, the Supreme Court laid down a major limitation. If the government wants to diminish the area of a state in order to cede Indian territory to a completely foreign country, they absolutely cannot do that with a simple law. Giving territory away strictly requires a full-blown constitutional amendment. We actually saw this exact rule put into practice pretty recently. In 2015, the 100th constitutional amendment was passed to solve an absolute geographical nightmare. India and Bangladesh completely redrew their porous, incredibly confusing border by swapping over 160 tiny territorial enclaves. To put that into perspective, these were essentially little islands of one country locked entirely inside the borders of the other. It was a massive diplomatic achievement, and it required officially changing the constitutional boundaries of 4 separate Indian states. Section 6. The modern map. Let's look at the 21st century and see how this living map continues to be sculpted today. Over the last couple of decades, the driver for change has shifted somewhat from linguistic demands to administrative efficiency and regional development. This led to carving out 3 brand new states in the year 2000. Then, after years of long-standing demands, we saw the birth of Telangana in 2014 from Andhra Pradesh. And most recently, the historic 2019 reorganization that abolished the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, bifurcating the state into 2 separate union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. But hey, it's really important to note that the map doesn't just divide and fracture, it also consolidates for administrative ease. We saw exactly this in 2020 when 2 Western Union territories were merged into one single Union territory. Which brings us to the current tally of this incredible ongoing geopolitical puzzle. After over 70 years of constant additions, subtractions, bifurcations, and mergers, the Republic of India stands today at exactly 28 states and 8 Union territories. So, what are the absolute key takeaways you should grab from this explainer? First, India's map is legally designed from the ground up to be flexible. Parliament can redraw internal boundaries by ordinary law. Second, early reorganizations were heavily driven by linguistic demands, while the Northeast was shaped much more by the need to protect tribal and cultural identities. And finally, while internal borders are wonderfully fluid, changing external borders with foreign nations requires a strict constitutional amendment. Because the Constitution guarantees an indestructible union of destructible states, we have to ask ourselves, are we looking at the final draft right now? Given the sheer history we've just covered, it's highly unlikely. There are still regional demands for new states based on development and local administration. So what will the map of India actually look like 20 years from now? It's a genuinely fascinating question to ponder. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep your eyes on the map.